You haven't really tasted a strawberry until you've had one sun-ripened from your own garden. Store-bought berries are overpriced, bland, and grown with tons of chemicals unless they're organic, making them even more expensive. But at home, you don't need pesticides, you don't need tons of fertilizer, and the flavor is on a whole other level. Strawberries are one of the highest value crops you can grow yourself, especially if you're looking to save money, avoid chemical residue, and get big harvests in a small space. I've been growing them for over a decade now, and I've learned a lot through trial and error. And strawberries are just one of 25 high-value crops that can be grown at home for seasonal eating year-round. I've got a free guide that walks you through all 25 and when to plant them, and I have it linked below. I still remember picking alpine strawberries in the dappled shade of our backyard in West Michigan when I was little. That quintessential flavor has stuck with me, and now I grow strawberries every year for their flavor, nutrient value, and to increase our self-sufficiency, even in raised beds. The best part is, with the right approach, you can grow tons of berries in any space and never have to buy plants again. I'll break down the 5 most common mistakes that I've made myself that could be holding your strawberry plants back. And number 3 is a total game changer you'll wish you knew sooner. I know I did. At the end, I'll share a couple of bonus tips that are essential. The first mistake is letting runners take over without a plan, especially if there's limited space that we're maximizing. Strawberries are one of the most valuable crops you can grow in a home garden, but if you let them grow wild, especially runners, you could be missing out on bigger harvests and free plants that could keep your garden going for years. I started my first patch of these strawberry plants right here back in 2019 in a raised bed, and I've been propagating from that same lineage every single year since. In 2022, I knew a move was on the horizon for us, even though I didn't know when or where, so I propagated a batch and kept them in a different location just in case. Fast forward to right now, spring of 2025, and I propagated from that same line again in my new garden. I planted around 70 strawberry plants, all from runners I grew myself. And that's the beauty of strawberries when you manage them well. You might plant once, but you'll never have to buy them again if you follow a simple routine. Strawberries are perennials, and in cold climates, they go dormant in the winter. In late fall, I always mulch heavily around the crown to protect it from frost, especially in raised beds. If you're growing in containers, it's even more important to insulate the roots or move the pots to a sheltered spot. Come spring, the plants start waking up, pushing out new leaves, and soon after, runners. Runners are horizontal stems that grow from the parent plant and create new little baby plants. That's how most strawberry plants naturally spread. But here's where things get tricky. If you let runners grow wild, your bed turns into a tangled mess that actually reduces your harvest. Everything is competing for space, water, and nutrients, and it's tough to separate parent plants from new plants. If you have plenty of space and you plant the plants a couple feet apart, you can let the runners fill in that space during the first year. That's called the matted row system, and how I used to grow in my old, much larger garden. The rows were hilled up with plants a couple feet apart, and eventually the runners filled in the whole space. This is where the schedule I follow really makes a difference. Here's the simple breakdown for my favorite variety, which I'll tell you about a little bit later in the video. On year 1, plant to bare root or propagated runner plants. Bare root strawberry plants are just dormant strawberry plants sold without soil or a pot, allowing for easier shipping and planting in early spring. During the first year, remove all blossoms and most of the runners so the plants focus on growing big and strong. In the fall, let them put out runners if you're planning to propagate them. In the fall of year 1 or spring of year 2, propagate runners and plant them in a new bed or container. I personally prefer spring because it's easier to care for them when the weather's warming up and you can see them take off. In the fall, if you're transplanting new runner plants to a new location, a thick layer of mulch can protect them from really cold temps. Year 2, this is the year those original plants will give you their best harvest while you're removing the blossoms and runners from their babies. Year 3, the original bed really starts to decline, but their babies will be at their peak production. That spring, propagate again, and these would be the grandbabies in a different location. Tear out the original bed at the end of this season since they'll produce very little in year 4, and it would be wise to plant fall cover crops to help replenish the soil and add compost to amend before planting the great grandbabies in the spring of year 4. It might sound like a lot, but once you get into the rhythm, it's incredibly easy and rewarding. And if you're like me and love fresh berries and freeze them for smoothies all year, you'll know about how many you need. For a family of 4, 100 plants would produce way more than enough for eating fresh and freezing, which can be adjusted through the years as you drill down on your garden journal and figure out how much you actually eat. One of the bonus tips I'll share at the end of the video is how I actually propagate strawberry runners step by step, no matter vary your space. It's simple, and once you know how to do it, you can have a steady supply of free plants every year forever. Mistake number 2 can also make or break our harvests. Let's talk about the right spot to plant strawberry plants. We can do everything else right, but if we plant strawberries in the wrong location, we could be setting ourselves up for small harvests and struggling plants. When I was little, I remember picking tiny alpine strawberries from our garden tucked near the edge of the woods on the side of the house. They were tiny and sweet and grew well even with limited sun. That memory stuck with me, and now as someone who's grown strawberries for over a decade, I've tested them everywhere, in pots, in the ground, raised beds, you name it. My favorite methods are raised beds and containers, and here's why. Strawberries love the sun, at least 6 to 8 hours a day, which is considered full sun. Alpine strawberries are the exception though. They're more shade tolerant, and they can do fine with as little as 4 hours of sun, which makes them perfect for balconies or patios. But full sun isn't always ideal in every climate. If temps hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit and stay there for a while, strawberries can get stressed and start producing less. And that's where growing in smaller, controlled spaces gives you an edge, because it's easier to set up shade cloth and protect your plants from extreme heat or unpredictable weather. And then there's the soil. Strawberries aren't as picky about pH as blueberries, but they do best in slightly acidic soil with a pH from 6.0 to 6.5 with good drainage and organic matter. They hate compacted heavy clay, something I deal with a lot here in my area, and a major reason why I prefer raised beds. With raised beds or containers, you get total control over the soil. I use Espoma soil acidifier to gently adjust the pH if I need to. So if your strawberry patch isn't thriving, it might not be ideal for the variety. Too much shade or heavy soil might be holding you back, and where and how you plant plays a big role in another huge factor, the variety you choose. That leads us into the next mistake, and it's a total game changer once you learn how to get it right. And here's what I love about strawberries. They're such a high value crop, yet incredibly adaptable. Whether you have a big backyard or just a sunny balcony, you can customize your setup and grow an abundance of sweet homegrown berries right where you are. If we want strawberries that actually do what we hope they'll do though, whether that's huge harvests, snackable berries all season, or tons of runners for free plants, the right variety is essential. And this one decision can mean the difference between a garden goldmine and a total letdown. When I first started growing strawberries in raised beds about a decade ago, I picked varieties based on how delicious they sounded, not how they actually grew. I wanted big berries, big harvests, and lots to freeze for smoothies, but instead I got smaller berries, fewer of them, and to top it off, no runners. I thought something was wrong with the plants. I eventually realized that I had picked the wrong type entirely for what I wanted, and that mistake cost me a couple of years of real production, but it led me to dig deeper, do more research, and steer towards the right types. Since strawberries are perennials that can stay with you for years if you propagate them, getting it right early makes a big difference. So here's what I wish I could have figured out from the beginning. There are 3 main categories of strawberries, and each one grows very differently. Once you understand the difference, you can choose what works best for your space, climate, and your goals. June bearing, otherwise known as short day, are the classic heavy producers. They fruit once a year, usually in late spring to early summer, and then they produce 1 or 2 big crops. They also send out lots of runners, which is perfect if you want to propagate and keep your beds going. They're ideal if you want a big harvest all at once, and they're great for preserving. They top perform if you have space in beds or in-ground rows. They can be grown in large containers though, like 3 to 4 plants per 10-gallon grow bag, but the runners need to be managed by guiding them into nearby pots if you want new plants. Everbearing, otherwise known as long day, bloom when day length hits about 12 hours, and they give you 2 smaller harvests, typically 1 in spring and 1 in late summer. They produce fewer runners and stay compact, which makes them great for smaller spaces and containers. They're ideal if you want tidy, lower maintenance plants, prefer small harvests over time, and if you'd like to grow them in hanging baskets or planters. The berries are generally smaller than June bearing, and you can propagate them from runners, but you will get fewer of them compared to June bearing. Day neutral varieties do not care about daylight length, and they'll keep producing throughout the growing season as long as temps stay between the wide range of 40 degrees to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. The berries are smaller, but the harvest is steady as long as temps are pretty steady. They're ideal if you want constant snacking all season long, if you live in cooler climates, or if you have mild summers, and if you want neat and tidy container plants. The trade-off though is that they produced almost no runners, which makes propagation trickier, and you can propagate the few they do send out, but They're not your go-to if you want a long-term self-sustaining bed. Day-neutral varieties are often grown as annuals for best production, and the berries are also pretty small. Alpine strawberries are unique because the berries are tiny but burst with flavor like a concentrated version of a June-bearing berry. They produce little to no runners, so propagation happens by seed or clump division. My all-time favorite variety is called Sequoia, and it has the best traits of both June-bearing and ever-bearing varieties. It's officially classified as June-bearing, but it behaves like an ever-bearing plant. The traits that make it amazing are high yields early in the summer or late spring, like mid to late May here in upstate South Carolina, followed by continuous smaller harvests through the summer into fall, and it produces tons of runners for propagation. Although the later harvests aren't as big as the first, they're still substantial. If you're in a warm climate like I am here, this variety will thrive. The berries are enormous and incredibly flavorful, hands down the best tasting strawberry I've ever grown. Meanwhile, the day neutral ones I tried gave me tiny harvests that struggled in the heat and no runners. It just was not the right fit for my goals or space. But once you know your goals, whether it's preserving, snacking, and or propagating, you can match the right variety to your conditions and get amazing results. Even the best variety can underperform though if the watering isn't just right, and that leads us to the next mistake that so many of us make. This one gets a lot of us, especially since strawberries are perennials and go dormant or slow down in the winter, so we question what to do with them. Plus, their shallow roots make them a bit more sensitive than some other garden plants. Inconsistent watering, whether it's overwatering or underwatering, stresses the plants, and that stress directly leads to fewer berries or worse, plant death. It can even open the door to other problems because stressed plants are way more susceptible to pests and disease. When I first moved to South Carolina from Michigan and started growing strawberries, I assumed that during the winter in the mild climate, I would need to water them regularly, but I figured out that unless the soil completely dries out, I don't need to water. In fact, I never water my strawberries in winter where we are because our soil stays moist enough on its own. Spring is when we can shift gears. When strawberry plants start actively growing again, especially new runner transplants, consistent watering is key. This spring, I thought I was going to lose the majority of the new runners I planted in the raised beds here. They looked really rough, but I stuck to consistently watering, and every single one bounced back from transplant shock. Spring rain has helped tremendously as well, showing that early spring is a great time to propagate. It's amazing how resilient strawberries are though with just a little bit of attention. I'll probably need to thin a few of them later because I planted them pretty close together, and ideally they'd be planted about a foot apart, but better too many than not enough at this point in case some of them don't make it. Summer is when you really need to keep a close eye on things because that's when the heat and dry weather start to kick in, and when the plants are working hard, flowering, fruiting, and producing runners. Instead of measuring water though, I just check the soil, and if it feels like a wrung out sponge, moist but not soggy, that's just right. I'm a big fan of deep, slow watering so it reaches the root zone. Drip irrigation is an absolute game changer, and it's easier to install than you might think, especially in raised beds, containers, and hanging baskets. Here's another thing that gets overlooked: the crown. The strawberry crown is the little area between the leaves and the roots, and if it's planted too deep, the plant can rot. If it's too high and exposed, it can dry out and die. The perfect placement is when the bottom of the crown is right at the soil surface. And just because your plants aren't producing fruit in the fall doesn't mean you should stop paying attention. I keep an eye on mine up until winter, especially since we often have warm, dry falls. I'll continue to water until we get consistent rain later in the fall and there's enough moisture in the winter. Mulch shouldn't be skipped, especially when summer approaches, because it locks in moisture, protects roots from temperature swings, and even helps with weeds. I use pine straw because it's abundant and easy to grab around here, but any natural mulch will do just fine. Watering is one of the most obvious things we check if our plants are struggling, and getting the consistency right is everything. And speaking of consistency, there's another piece of the strawberry puzzle that can quietly make or break berry production. Fertilizing strawberries absolutely does not need to be overdone, which is one of the reasons why we grow our own, right? But totally forgetting, though, means less berries. I've found through the years that after amending with compost when planting, side dressing every year is enough fertilizer, and that's how I did it in my big in-ground berry patch. That's all it took. When I planted, I did hill the rows with my raised bed composted soil mix instead of planting directly in the red clay soil. I've also found that raised beds and containers need a bit more attention because they leach nutrients quicker. Strawberries are not heavy feeders, and that's one of the reasons they're so great for low maintenance gardens. But like any fruiting plant, they do need some nutrient support to really produce. In raised beds, I add compost at the beginning of the season, and then every month or so I give them a drink of fish emulsion. It's super gentle and they respond really well to it. Compost tea and worm castings are also good gentle fertilizers, and in grow bags, pots, or hanging baskets, the plants can be watered with these natural fertilizers every couple weeks since nutrients wash out faster. Espoma barytone is another good option, especially if the soil pH tends to be high, because it contains elemental sulfur to help nudge the pH down, which strawberries appreciate. And that's it. No complicated feeding schedule, just a few natural amendments that support thriving fruiting plants. So now let's talk about how we can multiply our harvests without spending a dime on new plants. That's not an exaggeration. Strawberry plants practically do most of the work for us. When I notice all these tiny new plants popping up on little runners every year, all that's left for me to do is guide those new plants into their next growing spot. When we see the little baby plants connected to the ends of the runners in the spring, or if they've already disconnected from the runners that formed last fall, it's time to pull them. You just carefully dig them up, which is easy since the roots are shallow. Next, transplant them to a bed or container, and if you need to wait a day or two, they can be wrapped in a damp towel to keep them happy until planting. For containers, you just place smaller pots around the original container and let the runners root themselves into the new soil. Once they've taken hold, snip the runner stem and you've got a whole new plant that'll give you berries and send out its own runners too. That's how you would build a self-sustaining strawberry system year after year, while following the plan we talked about earlier in the video. Once we've got all these beautiful strawberry plants thriving and spreading, you're going to want to protect them from pests who love the berries too. My final bonus tip is to not waste time and money on all the pest control gimmicks that do not work. Trust me, I have tried them all, from copper tape to traps to DIY tricks to hand picking and more. I was wasting time and money chasing gimmicks while my strawberries were still getting nibbled. I found that strawberries attract a whole lineup of pests, but the three biggest troublemakers for me have been slugs, birds, and rodents. After trying all the things, I found out the three things that actually do work. For birds and rodents, netting is your best friend. Just make sure the holes are big enough for pollinators to get through. Strawberries are self-fertile, but insect pollination really boosts berry size, shape, and overall yield. And netting is super easy to throw over raised beds or containers. For slugs, timing is everything. I found that if I pick the berries just before they're fully ripe, when they're almost there but not quite, I can beat the pests to them. They finish ripening just fine indoors, and I'm not left with slug bites in every single harvest. And if slugs are still out of control, my backup is Sluggo. It's OMRI listed for organic gardening, and it uses iron phosphate, which is a naturally occurring compound that's effective. Skipping the gimmicks and sticking to what you find actually works in your garden means you get to enjoy more strawberries and spend less time troubleshooting. Growing strawberries isn't complicated, but it's easy to make a few small mistakes that cost us big in terms of harvests. Now that we've got the solutions dialed in, I hope they help you grow more food and waste less time no matter what size your space is. If this helped you out, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with somebody else who's trying to grow strawberries this year. And before you go, don't forget to grab my free 25 Power Crops planting guide. It'll help you eat seasonally and know exactly when to plant high-value crops for year-round eating. You'll find the link below. Go grow those berries and let me know how it goes in the comments. Thanks for watching.